Today on Locked On Red Wings, Jake Guentzel brings a potent offensive threat that Detroit needs, but can they even afford him?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm formerly a broadcast producer for 97.1 The Ticket, where Scotty's the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And in today's episode, guys, we're going to be talking about Jake Guentzel. We talked about him at the trade deadline. We're going to talk about him again here. He was on our list, our docket to talk about for quite some time, but then there was the report from 32 Thoughts, Elliot Friedman, Jeff Merrick, talking about how Carolina is open to trading his rights, which is just vastly different from what we were talking about a week ago, right? We had read a report that they were prioritizing signing Guentzel over Necas, which is why Necas was on the trade block, but how quickly things change. And so we decided to prioritize talking Jake Guentzel next, because who knows when or if his expiring rights get dealt ahead of July 1st. So we wanted to talk about that sooner rather than later. But before we get to that, I gotta let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Also want to thank you guys for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Scotty, happy Monday. How are you doing, bud?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Had a heck of a weekend with the news. Was kind of all over the place, covering a lot of stuff, lacrosse state finals, some golf events, et cetera, et cetera. So pretty busy, but fun weekend. How about you?
Pretty good. Had a buddy's wedding. It was a really enjoyable time. I got myself feeling pretty good. We'll just put it like that.
I know.
You were probably on the receiving end of some of those texts. Anyways, on today's episode, obviously, like I previewed, we're going to talk about Jake Guentzel. But before we get to that, I want to just do a shout out to Ken Daniels, Mickey Redmond, who were voted by The Athletic and the poll that they did the number one play-by-play and color commentator duo in the NHL of all the TV broadcasts. Last year, they were number 2. This year, they were number 1, and the main reason they said that they rose from 2 to 1 was because that the playoff chase had them rise to heights that they didn't think that they could rise any higher. And it's no surprise to any of us, right? Like, we here in Red Wings land have known for a long time that Mickey Redmond and Ken Daniels were the best duo on television. I mean, there's a reason why when playoffs happen, sometimes they would tap on Ken Daniels' shoulder to call hockey games. Like, they, for over 2 decades now, have just been a staple. And the thing I love the most about their duo, Scotty, is that they're clearly homers, right? But not so homerish that they can't also talk about why the Red Wings are struggling, but also why the other team is so dang good. Like, they obviously are Red Wings fans, but they're not afraid to be real with it either. And that's what makes them so good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially Mickey, right? I mean, Mick is very much, Red Wing through and through, right? As we all know, but he will absolutely call somebody out on a bad play, a bad, shift, whatever. And also, with penalties is super fair, I think, in that area. But at the end of the day, I think that is their biggest strength as well. But at the end of the day, man, you don't get number one if you're not just unbelievably entertaining. And the two of them are the epitome of that. They are absolutely fantastic together. They have great chemistry. That's obviously been building for 2+ decades now. It's just, I would like to do a all 4 American sports kind of rating and see where they would slide in on that. If you did NHL, NBA, MLB, and NFL broadcast teams where Mickey and I don't know, like I feel like it would be high up. I feel like it would be really high up. And I feel like I'm not saying they're like the best in sports necessarily, but I'm not saying that they wouldn't get a shout up toward the top of the list.
Well, the problem you'd be dealing with that if you want to do 4 major sports is dealing with the bias towards those other sports.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like hockey's so much more
Anti-hockey
significantly
bias
niche.
is definitely a real thing. I don't know, man. Like Ken is, like you said, Ken is just so good and is continuously called upon to do bigger and bigger things. I guess a lot more, I don't know, a few years ago, but still like, they're both just the best. They're just the best.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course you get the Mickeyisms too, where Mickey's just Mickey all the time, and you wouldn't want it any other way. He's just so entertaining. Yeah, so I just wanted to give a quick shout out to that. Those two guys are the absolute best, and I'm super happy for them to get that award, to be number one on that poll, and I'm sure they're gonna be in that top 3 discussion for as long as that duo is together, honestly. Yeah. So with that being said, let's move on to our main topic in today's episode, and that is should the Red Wings pursue Jake Guentzel. Now, granted, of note, you can see I didn't say sign Jake Guentzel or trade for Jake Guentzel because it could be either way. The Hurricanes have made it abundantly clear, according to Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick, that the rights to Jake Guentzel's expiring contract are available for trade through a mid-round pick. Now, there's not, honestly, I actually haven't heard your thoughts on this, but I'm pretty confident that I would give them a 3rd or a 4th round pick, like straight up, whatever they wanted for the rights to acquire Jake Guentzel, because I feel like if you get that trade to go through, the chances of you signing that person are already pretty high to begin with. And it benefits the player being traded too, because obviously whatever team you're getting traded to has the ability to then sign you to 8-year max length rather than the 7-year max length in free agency. But then there's a risk that if that doesn't happen, then you lost a 3rd or 4th round pick for nothing and he walks away on July 1st regardless. But basically you're trading for exclusive rights to sign him before free agency begins. And I mean, I'm right off rip, I'm all down for that. I'm completely okay with doing that for Jake Guentzel.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, yeah, I think that really the only thing to say with that part of it is I find it really hard to believe that any team is going to pull trig on that if they aren't almost certain that they would be able to get a deal done with him, right? Like I'm sure there's conversations that are actively happening. No team's just going to be like, oh, we're just going to throw you a 3rd and like hope, right? That's not really how it works. They're going to make sure. I guess my point is no matter where he goes via trade, technically, I would be shocked if that team didn't extend him and wasn't where he ended up next season, just because I just find it really hard to believe that any team in the NHL is just going to give up a 3rd or a 4th round pick just to like chance it. They're going to have to be pretty sure about that. But yes, as far as value goes, obviously, if that comes with a contract extension slapped on afterwards, then yeah, I have no issue with a 3rd or a 4th for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a player that has a lot to offer, right? Like this year's 29, so he'd be going into his age 30 season coming up here. And this past year, he had a combined, let me double check on this. He had a combined 30 goals and 77 points this season between Pittsburgh and Carolina. And the big question with Jake Guentzel at the start of the season, right, when these conversations began to percolate, whether or not he'd stay with Pittsburgh because their cup window is closing, was whether or not Jake Guentzel could then duplicate those types of numbers with another team away from Sidney Crosby. That Alex DeBrincat-esque conversation, right? Could DeBrincat produce away from Patrick Kane? Well, Jake Guentzel left Pittsburgh, went to Carolina, and again, Carolina's a very good hockey team. They're the best possession hockey team in the league. They get they outshoot every opponent super heavily, but he had an even better post-deadline than he did pre-deadline, where he was 52 points in 50 games with Pittsburgh, but before that he got dealt, he was 25 points in 17 games after he got dealt and had 9 points in 11 games in the postseason. So Jake Guentzel very much proved in at least that small of a sample size that he is legit and that his production is not because of Sidney Crosby, more so that he is real and that he helped Sidney Crosby also thrive. This is a guy who at 29 years old, going into 30s in the prime of his life, who's had 2 40-goal seasons, a 36-goal season. He's a prominent goal scorer. I mean, what team in the NHL wouldn't want a Jake Guentzel on their team other than ones that couldn't afford him?
Right, exactly, 100%. This is in terms of would it be a welcomed addition? That's a pretty quick yes, and we can just move on to start talking about the intricacies of it.
Right, it's like the Natchez thing again, all over it.
Right.
So, and we'll get into some of the intricacies of it and like some of the smaller details of him as a player in segment 2. So stay tuned for that in Locked On Red Wings. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. And if you're a baseball fan, a Tigers fan in particular, that was Jake Rogers on Sunday. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty and I are talking about Jake Guentzel. Just a little bit more finer details on what makes Jake Guentzel such an offensive threat besides the obvious, the goal scoring, the playmaking. You know, according to his player card on Evolving Hockey, he's an 86th percentile forward. So he's obviously a ginormous offensive threat. And when you look at his player usage chart, he played 17 games. So if you want to sort it by the last 17 games, that's fine as well. He is a positive relative to shot attempts, unblocked shot attempts, and expected goals to his teammates. The one thing I would say to be careful with Jake Guentzel is he's not great defensively, which is another a big sticking point with Steve Yzerman, right? We've talked about it on end. Steve Yzerman wants the team to get better defensively. He's not great defensively. And with Carolina, he got 65% offensive zone deployments. That is a lot. It's like 20% more than Patrick Kane got. Now, granted, you have to keep in mind who the two teams are, right? The Carolina Hurricanes were the best possession team in the NHL. I've been over that. They had the most shot attempts for and the least shot attempts against at 5-on-5. So they oftentimes got offensive zone deployments. But of those players, he got the most. No forward at least on the Carolina Hurricanes in those last 17 games since he got dealt had more offensive zone deployments than Jake Guentzel. So he's a guy that gets exclusively almost put in the offensive zone, but when you put him there, he thrives. He was a pretty strongly Corsi IV relative positive to all of his teammates. So he's a very good possession heavy forward who's going to score goals and get assists, and he's going to help you on the power play. In those last 17 games, he was third in total 5-on-5 ice time. He was third in total power play ice time, and his production, those 25 points he had with Carolina in those last 17 games, was split very evenly between 5-on-5 on power play as well. So it's not just exclusively a power play merchant. He had 9 points on the power play, 10 at 5-on-5. The only thing you're not getting out of him is penalty kill and defensive zone deployments. But with that, with all those offensive zone deployments, Scotty, a lot of that came against the other team's tougher competition. So you put him in the offensive zone against the other team's top 6, and he's still going to outpossess them. And we talk about it, right? To have good defense, you got to have the puck. And if he's out there and he has the puck, that's good defense.
Yeah, well, and I mean, just in general, I don't know, like, we are, again, we talked about it a little bit last week, trying to find someone who is an elite, like top-end talent offensive player that is also sound at a minimum or just straight up good defensively. Those aren't just like out there for everybody to just grab whenever they want. Like, those are the highest paid players in the NHL. Like, those are elite talents, right? People who are really good on both sides of the puck. So, like, yeah, obviously there are some shortcomings defensively, but in the same breath, I mean, he showed, again, albeit with the deployments, that he can make it work in a defensive system that Carolina has. I mean, again, if we found out that the Wings acquired him, we would be thrilled. We'd be over the moon. And yes, he is someone that is going to significantly help you on the offensive side of the puck, which, as we've talked about at length, is something that the Wings really are, I think, trying and should actively be, at least kicking the tires on to improve this summer and just get another solidified kind of top end level offensive talent.
Right. And like we talk about so much, we talked about it with the Marty Necas conversation, for instance, right? Like you want a top 6 superstar forward who's also going to be really good defensively. Like you're asking for somebody who probably does not exist on the open market. Like if you want to get better, Jake Guentzel does that. He's 29 years old, so yeah, I guess of the people who's available, he'd be slightly older, right? Like he's older than Martin Necas, but he has a much more proven track record. And you sign him, yeah, you might not put him in the defensive zone, but if you put him in the offensive zone against other teams' top 6, he's going to excel and help to keep the puck in the offensive zone. He's going to allow you to stay in the offensive zone longer, meaning that there's less defensive zone deployments to even have him out there potentially for. Like, and of course, the goal scoring threat of it, right? Like the biggest thing we talk about, this team needs another top 6 scoring offensive threat. And Jake Guentzel is that. If he can score, again, like he scored 40 twice in his career, and that's great. But it's selfish of us, I believe, to expect a guy to come in here to a team that doesn't have Sidney Crosby or Patrick Kane with Alex DeBrincat, right? And expect that player to go right back to 40 goals. But conservatively, if he can be a 30-goal-plus goal scorer like he was, again this year between 2 different teams, then it's a massive win, especially if he remains point per game. Like you're adding a guy to your roster who's going to be getting you 80-plus points a season, prorated across 82 games. This season, he played 67 games, and he had 77 points. So Jake Guentzel I think that the pros with his game so heavily outweigh the cons that are the fact that he's not necessarily, at least metrically great in defensive zone deployments, but also how true is that when at least with the last 17 games he played, the Carolina Hurricanes don't play in their own defensive zone. You don't get an opportunity to see him there. Now, like his player card, yes, and this year has him as a net negative at even strength defense, but he's a 36th percentile defensively, but he's also an 86th percentile offensively. Like the pros just so heavily outweigh the cons. Right. I mean? Like it's not like he's not a black hole.
Right. It's not you're a traffic cone out there, right? Like that's not horrific. So if you have someone who is below average defensively, and not just below average, he is, solidified, whatever you want to say, below average, but below average defensively for the offensive upside he brings, and clearly is able to thrive in, not that the Wings and the, Canes have a similar system, but in a system that is more possession and defense oriented, and he's still able to get his opportunities and production offensively. I think that probably, lends to a positive thing from the Wings perspective.
Okay, but like for example, right, in the last 17 games of the season, his expected goals for percentage was, well, that certainly cannot be right. Oh, that's on the power play. That's why that looks so funky. I was like 96%, man. He's incredible. Well, of course it would be. I was so confused there. He's third on the Carolina Hurricanes in those last 17 games that he played with them at post-trade deadline, right? Because I want to separate those two because the stats are going to look very different on 2 different teams. He was third on the team at 5-on-5 in expected goals for percentage at 66th percentile. Now, if you want to turn that to relative, because I like relative to compare with his teammates.
Oh, we know.
He was also third on the team then with a 10% relative. So the team was 10% better with Jake Guentzel on the ice at 5-on-5 than against. And that it comes with a negative 0.79 expected goals against per 60. Yet his expected goals for is so much better that it heavily outweighs that fact. So he is there's absolutely no reason to not want Jake Guentzel. Besides, and we'll talk about this in segment 3, how much it would cost to get him. And I think that's going to be with a lot of the conversations we've had, the biggest deterrent to signing somebody like this is what it would mean for cap implications.
Absolutely.
So we'll talk about that in segment 3 of Lockdown Red Wings. Segment 3, Lockdown Red Wings podcast. Scotty, let's talk a little bit about what his going rate is. I've seen reports that he's going to be in the $9+ million range, and assuming you get him in free agency, then it's a max length of 7 years, rather than if you were to trade for his rights and sign a deal prior. Let's just assume he hits free agency because that's what it sounds like he wants, and then you sign him there. So 7 years, $9+ million. He's going to be here from ages 30 to 37. You'll get the best years of his career and probably some of his more or less than stellar years as he's on the other side of that, that hump in his career as he gets a little bit older. You're paying for success now with Jake Guentzel, but with the cap now officially set at $88 million this year, the Red Wings, again, we've been saying it, $12 to $13 million is what they're going to have to probably play with after the Sider and Raymond contract. Can you afford to give him $9 million, leaving you just about, what's the math there, $4 million left to fill out the rest of your locker room?
Yeah, so this is like my favorite part of team building is like these conversations, right? So like here's my question that I throw out to you and the class, okay? Is there a world in which the extra year, the difference between 7 and 8 years, so the difference between trading for his rights and not, you could use to tell him, hey, we're going to give you a whole extra year, so why don't you trim about $500K a year off of the AAV? Do you think, and maybe 500 is too much, maybe it's too little. There's no way he'd be like, oh yeah, shave $1 million every year off for an extra year. But could you get, I don't know, shave a little bit off the top, right? Give me a number one on the side, shave a little off the top. Like, could you, you don't know what I'm talking about because you're bald, but like,
I used to have hair.
It's debatable. My point is, could you do that? Like, is that an incentive almost to trade him where you could be like, hey, maybe we can knock off a few, whether it's, $100,000 or $500,000 AAV wise to give him another year. And then the other counter to that is, would that be something you want to do? For me, I'm not really sure that between 7 and 8 years is too different in like my long-term, scope of this team. So if you can shave a little bit off in the yearly, all I really care about is AAV, man. And like, obviously if you have bad AAV and you're like unproductive and you're here for a lot of years, that's bad. But like, again, the difference between 7 and 8 is minuscule to me. So if you can do that, that would, but I also, that was again, a question I'm kind of throwing out there. I'm not sure that's something he would do. I'm not sure he'd be like, oh yeah, like, that's worth X amount of money shaved off a year for that one extra year of security at 38 years old or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting thought I've seen thrown around there by a few people. And I mean, yeah, in general, like if you're talking 8.5, 8.75, then again, as to your point, a lot of people are saying possibly 9+. That's certainly pricey, and you do the math of cup window and whatnot. And I think that if there is a deterrent from it, it is the fact that you would probably be committing to paying a dude in his mid and then late 30s $9-ish million a year. And I'm not really sure that that's something that, whether you want to do it or not, or whether I want to do it or not, I'm not really sure that's something Steve Yzerman subscribes to.
Yeah, I mean, that's a debate for the front office, right? Like, in a vacuum, I would absolutely sign Jake Guentzel to that $9+ million contract, but like, I can't take Jake Guentzel at $9+ million per year, or 8.75 if you trade for his rights and get him to sign an 8-year deal, right? And then also go out there and get Matt Roy, who I'm very high on, or Brett Pesce, who I'm very, very high on.
Right,
to
we can't just get everybody we've talked about.
Right. So, and that's why I keep going back to with this conversation this offseason that the Red Wings really are going to have because of who they have to sign, and because of, unfortunately, some of the signings they've made in the past, they're going to only really have the cap space to make, in my opinion, one splash signing this year, because they have got to leave themselves, and I really think they only really have to make one splash signing this year and fill out the rest of the roster with other smart signings, right? Like, no big names. You don't need to make 3 or 4 big name signings, but like fill the rest of your roster out with your Christian Fishers, who were very good and great role players, right? Or a Daniel Sprong type, not necessarily saying like a Daniel Sprong type in particular, but guys who are cheap and effective is what my point is. Because you're in a situation now with Raymond and Sider finally deserving to get paid. You got to think hard about that. So where would you prefer that money, the bulk of that money, to go to? A Jake Guentzel who's going to immediately make your top 6 better. He's going to make your possession better, which will in turn make your defense better. Not that he's good defensively, but having the puck more is always going to help make the team better. And is going to increase your goal scoring. So you're going to win more games and make your top 6 a bona fide threat for the first 2 lines, assuming you can get somebody in the top 6 on the other side, right? Because if Patrick Kane leaves, you have to fill that area or that area as well. But like or would you rather pay $6+ million to Matt Roy and massively upgrade your defense through the trickle down effect, right? The ripple effect rather. So it's just, you got to make the decision what's more important. And thank God I'm not in the front office because I don't know what that decision is.
You can say that again. Holy cow.
God, you've been taking a lot of shots at me today. I can't figure out what the right decision is because they're both needs, in my opinion.
For sure.
So, do I want Jake Guentzel? Absolutely.
Right.
I just don't know what it's going to take to bring him to Detroit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's going to start with probably a 3rd-round pick, and then probably... Yeah, like the projections for him are weird, too, as far as the contract goes, because you see some out there that are, like it's going to start with an 8, but then you go, okay, but the cap just went up again. And you have, again, like some just are outright like, no, it's going to be 9, maybe even a little bit more. So it's kind of weird. There's not a general, there is a general consensus. He's going to make a lot of money, but it's kind of in that anywhere from mid-low 8s all the way up to mid-9s. And I think that the bidding war of just being a free agent is certainly going to be a part of that for sure. But that's why I think teams might be hesitant to trade for the rights weirdly too. Cause it's, again, like you're not going to do it unless you're sure, I guess, looping back to my original point. Like that's why that hasn't just happened. Like, if people weren't worried about it, then they, a team would have done it the second that they put that offer into the world. They would have been like, yeah, like that, any team would have just done that immediately. But the last thing you want is to trade for him and then him go, okay, well, now after a trade like that, the player then has the leverage again, right? The player can be like, okay, now you gave up an asset to acquire me. It would be ridiculous of you to not re-sign me. Give me 9.5, right? Like that puts all of the leverage in negotiations into Guentzel and his agent's hands, in this situation. If they are going to trade him at post-trade, he has all the leverage in the world. So I think that is only going to lead to the price possibly being hiked up as well.
Yeah, I just don't think that there would be a trade for his negotiating rights unless there was mutual interest in him going to that team. A contract
100%.
Doesn't have to be like hammered out, but an unwritten, just a little conversation like, would you want to play here? Yeah, I'd want to play here. Okay, here's a 3rd-round pick. We'll take him. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, I would absolutely take him. Again, it's just like with a lot of the conversations that we've been having this offseason, where last year and the year prior, we'll be like, yeah, just give him the money. It's a no-brainer. The team needs to get better. They'd make the team better. Well, now we've given people money, and now we're like, yeah, well, maybe not. That might cost too much. We got to play banker now. We got to play cap. But speaking of cap friendly, that's going away. Did you see that?
No.
The Capitals bought cap friendly.
Oh yeah, I did see that.
And so cap friendly is going dark after July 5th or whatever. Thanks, Washington. Right, or Puckopedia.
Right.
This is why we can't have nice things.
Why did they do that?
Why did who do what?
Why did the Capitals buy it?
Because now they'll have this cap friendly has become a tool that NHL teams use.
Oh yeah, 100%, yeah.
And now they exclusively get to use it.
Oh, got it.
they can prevent everybody else, including the fans and all the podcasters who love to use Cap Friendly. I have 3 Cap Friendly tabs up right now.
Right.
And now it's going to be gone.
Yeah, that sucks. Yeah.
Yep, it does. And Washington made a lot of angry fans today. Made a lot of enemies today.
Good.
If Red Wings fans weren't already
I was
really
going to
mad at the
say, like,
Capitals.
you were already there, brother. I know. I'm glad everybody else joined the party. Yeah, we've been there.
It's like literally pulling the ladder up after you climb it.
Right.
Thanks, Washington. Appreciate it. All right. Scotty, any final thoughts?
We ball.
We do ball. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow, same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.